Hello, and we're back again for story time. Don't worry, I don't just wear the same clothes every single day. I still do wash. I've just recorded lots of these videos on the same day. Lockdown hasn't got to me that much just yet, don't panic. Just wanted to put that out there before we start. Right, the children have presented Roz with a toolkit belt, and she feels like she needs to stay, but she also wants to break the news and try and get them to help her shortly. So we'll see if she does. Chapter 31. The Campfire. Wood smoke billowed up from the backyard and drifted across the farm. Roz was building a campfire for the Sharifs. In her old life, the robot made fire by cracking special stones together until she got a spark. In her new life, she used a lighter. The family sat around the rippling flames and gazed up at the stars. The dogs stretched out on the warm ground. The robot was standing nearby, but her thoughts were far away. Her computer brain was scrolling back through memories of campfires and of stargazing with Brightbill. Fluffy white marshmallows were skewered onto the end of sticks and then roasted above the flames. The children laughed as their marshmallows caught fire. They liked them charred on the outside and gooey on the inside. Their father preferred them evenly browned. When the Sharifs weren't stuffing their mouths, they were chatting happily. "That's the space station," said Jaya, pointing to a tiny dot that was slowly moving through the sky. "I can't believe people live there." "Animals live there too," said Jad. "The station has a farm. We should bring our cows up and show those space farmers how it's done."
"I think our cows are perfectly content right here on Earth," said Mr. Sharif. "And so am I."
Once the marshmallows were all gone, Jaya and Jad snuggled up with Oscar, stared into the flames and asked their father about the old days. But the children were just too cosy to stay awake for long, so Mr. Sharif spoke to Roz instead.
"We made campfires all the time when I was a boy."
The man poked the coals with his marshmallow stick, and the glowing embers floated into the air.
"The whole family would sit around like this, telling stories. We had a nice life here. But then me older brother and sister moved to the city, me parents got old, and everyone expected me to take over the farm. I couldn't run this place by myself," he went on, "so I hired Jamila. I did the farm work and she managed the business. We made a good team, and then we fell in love. Ugh. When Jamila was pregnant with Jad, we brought a few machines to help out. Then Jaya showed up and we brought a few more. If I'd known one of those machines would be the death of her."
The farmer's voice trailed off. Roz wanted to know more about Jamila, and about Mr. Sharif, and about the rest of his family, but a normal robot wouldn't ask personal questions. So she kept her questions to herself and dropped another log on the fire. Remember, she doesn't want Mr. Sharif to realise that she's different, otherwise she'll be straight off to the repair shop and won't remember who Brightbill even is. Chapter 32. The Old Barn. Long ago, Hilltop Farm was a very different place. The original farmers grew vegetable gardens and fruit orchards, and they raised chickens and sheep and goats. The farm had changed a lot since then, but there were still signs of its past. Low stone walls lined some of the fields. A rusty tractor sat in the weeds, and hidden within a densely wooded groove was the old barn. The barn hadn't been used in generations. Over the years, trees had quietly grown up around it, and moss had spread across its roof. But the barn was still strong and solid, and Roz wanted to take a look inside. The big barn door screeched along its rails. "Hello," said the robot, peering into the darkness. "Is anyone here?" There she is, looking in, about to go in. A mouse squeaked and scurried off sight, and then Roz had the barn to herself. She stepped through the doorway and switched on her headlights. The vast interior was crisscrossed with thick wooden beams. Stairways and ramps led up to the rock lofts and platforms. Lanterns hung from hooks on the wall. Old-fashioned farm equipment lay here and there. The barn still had the faint smell of farm animals, and even though none had lived there in ages. A large trunk sat on the worktop table, covered in dust. Roz carefully opened the lid and examined its contents. a collection of farming magazines, a pair of leather gloves, a pencil nub, and then she noticed a small journal. The name Cyrus Sharif was elegantly scrawled across the covers. The pages were filled with his handwritten notes and hand-drawn diagrams about raising livestock and growing crops and building barns, about working the land with the help of the strong animals and the simple machines. Cyrus Sharif had also jotted down his thoughts about the long history of farming. He believed that the modern world owed its entire existence to ancient farming. When early humans first started growing their food, those farms were small and primitive, but they supported villages, which became towns, which then became cities. The writings were so wise and insightful that Roz read the journal from cover to cover. By the end, she almost felt like she knew Cyrus Sharif, whoever he was. The journal was a treasure, and she tucked it into the pocket of her tool belt for safekeeping. Chapter 33. The Autumn. Autumn colours were sweeping across the farm country. The lush greens of the summers faded to reds and browns. Crops were harvested, leaves fell away, and the landscape turned stark and grey. On Hilltop Farm, the cows were grazing on what remained of the pasture's grass, while the herding machine hovered nearby. The field machine was preparing the fields for winter. The drone circled the farm several times a day, but there was less to report in autumn. Although Jaya and Jad were busy with school, they always made time for Roz. The children never grew tired of listening to the robot stories, and they never grew tired of sharing their own. The bees and the mice and the deer and the frogs and the raccoons and the squirrels and the snakes were all getting ready for a cold winter. So too were the birds. The owls spruced up their nest, the crows stockpiled acorns, the swallows were still swooping over the farmland. But they would soon be leaving for the winter, and any day now, other migratory birds would begin passing through on their long journey to the south. Who do we know that's done long journeys to the south in these books? Chapter 34. The Delighted Geese. A flock of geese had just landed at Hilltop Farm. It was the first flock of the autumn migration. The geese floated on the pond, cleaning their feathers and nibbling on weeds, but they all stopped what they were doing when Roz waved and said hello. The robot never forgot a face, and she was certain she didn't know any of these geese. But they seemed to know her. Before she introduced herself, the lead goose squawked, "Is your name Roz?" The robot stared at the goose. "Yes, it is." "And you can speak the animal language?" The answer was obvious, but Roz politely said, "Yes, I can speak the animal language." "Do you, by any chance, have a goose for a son?" "Yes, I do," said Roz. "His name is Brightbill." At that, the voice blurted out, "The stories are true!" And suddenly the flock was smiling and fluttering over to the robot. When the commotion settled down, the leader explained, "All along our migration we've heard rumours of a robot who can speak with animals, who has a goose for a son, and who is trapped on a farm. That sounded ridiculous to us, but here you are." The flock was absolutely delighted to meet our robot. They lounged around the pond for a couple of days, chatting with Roz whenever she came by, and then they continued flying south to their wintering grounds. Another flock of geese arrived, and the same thing happened all over again. Roz welcomed them, and they were delighted to meet the legendary robot, and then the flock continued south. Then it happened again. And again. Before long, the coming and going of delighted geese was just another part of the robot's autumn routine. Straggling behind the others, as usual, was Wingtip's flock. We remember her met her at the beginning of the book. When Roz saw them splashing on the pond, she felt something like hope that they might have news of her son. Sadly, the goose had no news to report, and as the flock took off and left Roz behind, she began to question whether she'd ever see Bright Bill again. So she got hopes up, and then they've been let down again. But we'll have to see what happens. Will she ever see Bright Bill again or not? I'm leaving it there.